Hi, my name is Skip Vaccarello. In this short video, I plan to give you a perspective on ethics, and specifically some tips on how to make ethical decisions if you're in an organization or a business. I found as a leader, and you'll find as a leader, that you'll be faced with decisions that sometimes have ethical implications all the time. It's fairly frequent that I found you have to make decisions that may have ethical implications. So let me first start with a story. I teach an MBA program on leadership and ethics. And I was interested in viewing an online discussion among my students on the question of how do absolute values affect a system of ethics? Very interesting question. I was somewhat surprised to find that many of my students didn't believe that there are absolute values. They didn't use these words, but essentially they were saying that all values are relative maybe to the culture that someone grew up in, relative to the background that someone had, maybe relative to the faith that someone had. So, given that information, the next day I went into class and I did an experiment. I told the students, well, I just received a notice from the Internal Revenue Service that I owe $3,000. And I really don't want to pay that amount. Now, I was thinking that I have 15 students in this class. If each one of you pay me $200, then I'll have my $3,000, and I feel that I'm providing you good value. So I want to ask you if you will each pay me $200. Now, you don't have to do that. It's not an obligation. But I'll say this, that it may affect your final grade as to who gives me the $200 and who doesn't. Well, there was stunned silence in the room. Finally, one student piped up and said, well, that's not fair. Another student said, well, that's not right. I said, aha, it sounds like there is a right and a wrong. It sounds like there are absolute values. So that prompted a wonderful discussion on relativism versus absolute values. So yes, there is a right and a wrong. There are absolute values. So let me give you some hints as to the way, at least I've found, a context for making ethical decisions. Now, there was a wonderful book that was written a number of years ago by John Maxwell. The title of his book is There's No Such Thing as Business Ethics. Now, it's a catchy title because Maxwell went on to make the point that it's not about business ethics, it's about ethics, about making decisions in light of ethics that apply to everyone in all situations, not just business. Now, the central point, the main thesis of his book was that the golden rule is often the good context to make ethical decisions. Now, the golden rule, as you may remember, it's in the Bible. The golden rule says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. In other words, treat other people the way you would like to be treated. Now, the interesting thing is that the golden rule is not just in the Bible, it's part of the Christian faith. Virtually every world religion has a similar concept of treating other people the way that you want to be treated. So that's one absolute value that you can look at for helping to make ethical decisions. Now, it doesn't apply to all situations, but it's a helpful guide, a helpful context. The second point I want to make is that you should define, if you're running an organization, you should define the values that are important to you and to that team, and you can incorporate those into the culture. But it's also important when you're defining those values is to not just have them anchored in something that's a good principle, of right and wrong, but even more importantly, it's important to make sure you live out those values, not just put them on a piece of paper, but live them out. One of my favorite business authors, Jim Collins, says one of the hallmarks of successful organizations over a long period of time are companies that truly live out those values, in which companies in which those values are part of the whole culture of that organization. So defining values is another way of helping to make ethical decisions. Now let me give you some tips for the process. I've talked about the context, now the process for making an ethical decision. Now the first thing is make sure you get the facts. Get all the facts straight to see what it is that you're faced with. Now let me give you a situation. So it might be that your company has faced a downturn. And you're faced with the prospect of potentially laying off people. Not a fun thing to do, but that's one of those things to continue the organization that you may have to do. Well, evaluate the options. That may not be the only option. It could be to reduce everyone's salary by a little bit, or reduce the executive salaries by a certain amount. That could be one possibility. One of the problems with that is that if you've reduced salaries for a period of time, some of the best people in your organization may leave because they can find, a comparable salary at another company. So there are implications of that, but that's one possibility. It could be, and I see this happen in Silicon Valley all the time, when a company is slowing down, they'll give people a paid time off, especially during the holidays. So there are a variety of ways that you can go through and evaluate the options. It might be increasing or spending some money on a marketing program or advertising or sales to increase sales, or there may be other ways to reduce expenses, but evaluate all those options. Third is to make a decision, but test the decision. And you test it to see if it makes sense to you and to the organization, so you test it. And if you are a follower of Christ, that one good way to test it is to pray about it. Is this the right decision, or is God leading you in another fashion? And the Bible often will have some good information that can help you in making that and testing that decision. Test it with a trusted group of friends. It may be that like I have an accountability group that we can bring decisions like this to. Each one of us have done that over a period of time and get input from trusted friends. It may be that you have a mentor or a coach that you can bring those sort of decisions to and ask for their advice. So testing it is point 3. Point 4 is make the decision. No decision is a decision. So you make the decision and you implement it, and implement it quickly. And do it with a sense of compassion. So if it is laying people off, figure out how you're going to do that. Is there an organization that's no longer needed due to the downturn? Is it the newest employees that should be laid off? Take some time, if it is a layoff situation, on how to implement that. But make the decision, implement it. And the final point is to learn from it. You may be faced with a similar decision later. Evaluate it, and then learn from it for future consideration. Well, thank you very much. I hope that this perspective on ethics has given you some help.